The court's fluorescent lights hummed, casting a cold, sterile glow over the room. The judge, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, adjusted his glasses and sighed deeply. "We'll hear closing arguments," he said, his voice flat but firm. On one side of the courtroom sat Elena, her dark brown hair pinned neatly behind her ears, her face pale but composed. She clutched the armrests of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Across from her was Adrian, his once boyish charm dulled by exhaustion, his sharp blue eyes now rimmed with red. Between them, like a living ghost of their once perfect life, sat a little girl, Sophia. Her strawberry blonde curls bounced as she swung her legs under the chair, blissfully unaware of the storm swirling around her. The courtroom seemed to freeze for a moment, a still frame of a life that had unraveled too quickly. The judge looked at Sophia and then at her parents, his mouth tightening as if he could feel the weight of the decision he would soon have to make. But this was not where their story began. It began, as most stories of love do, in the warmth of a simpler time. 7 years earlier, the air was thick with the scent of sea salt and sunscreen. Elena stood at the edge of the beach, her toes curling into the warm sand. She'd come to Clearwater for a weekend getaway, desperate to escape the monotony of her office job. The sun was beginning its descent, casting a golden glow over the waves, when she first saw him. Adrian was perched on a surfboard, his sun-kissed skin gleaming and his laugh carrying over the water. He looked so carefree, so alive, that it made Elena's chest ache in a way she didn't understand. When he came out of the water, shaking droplets from his hair like a golden retriever, their eyes met. "Hey," he said, flashing her a grin that seemed to hold the whole world in it. "You look like you could use some fun." Elena had scoffed. "Do I?" "Yes," he'd said, unbothered by her sarcasm. "And lucky for you, I'm great at making things fun." That night, they walked along the shore, the ocean whispering secrets at their feet. Adrian told her about his dream of opening a surf school, about the years he'd spent working odd jobs just to save up for it. Elena, in turn, confessed her dissatisfaction with her life, a corporate climb that felt more like a prison. "I think you're scared," he'd said softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't live. You just exist." His words stung because they were true, but they also ignited something in her, a spark of rebellion, of possibility. By the time they parted ways that night, the seeds of something deeper had been planted. The years that followed were, at first, blissful. Adrian convinced Elena to leave her job and move to the small coastal town where he planned to start his surf school. Together, they built a life that felt like a dream. They painted the walls of their tiny beach house together, danced barefoot in the kitchen, and made love under the soft hum of candlelight. When Sophia was born, their love seemed to deepen in ways neither of them could have predicted. Adrian would rock the baby to sleep with stories of his surfing adventures, while Elena watched, her heart swelling with a love that felt too big to contain. But dreams are fragile things, and life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. It started with the little things, the arguments about money, the exhaustion that came with raising a child. Adrian's surf school wasn't bringing in as much as they'd hoped, and Elena had taken a part-time job at a local cafe to make ends meet. She resented him for his idealism, for the way he clung to his dream even as reality bore down on them. He, in turn, resented her for her practicality, for the way she seemed to have lost the spark that had drawn him to her in the first place. "I'm killing myself trying to make this work," she snapped one night after Sophia had gone to bed. "And you're just out there, chasing waves like a teenager." "I'm chasing waves?" he shot back, his voice rising. "I'm trying to build a future for us. You knew what you were signing up for when you came here." The fights grew louder, more frequent. They stopped touching, stopped laughing, stopped looking at each other the way they once had. Their home, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield. And then came the night it all fell apart. "I can't do this anymore," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, her suitcase at her feet. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He didn't look up. "So that's it?" he said, his voice hollow. "You're just leaving?" "I have to," she said, though the words felt like knives in her throat. For Sophia, for me. He didn't fight her. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe he thought she wouldn't go through with it. But when she walked out the door, he didn't follow. Now in the courtroom, Elena wondered if she had made the right choice. The past 2 years had been hard, harder than she'd ever imagined. She'd moved back to the city, taken a stable job, and tried to create a structured life for Sophia. But Adrian hadn't let go. He fought for visitation rights, for weekends and holidays, for every scrap of time he could get with his daughter. And now, he was fighting for full custody. Adrian's lawyer rose to his feet, his voice steady and persuasive as he painted a picture of a father who was deeply involved in his daughter's life, who had built his surf school into a thriving business, who had created a home where Sophia could grow up surrounded by the sea and the sand and the warmth of a close-knit community. When Elena's lawyer spoke, she countered with tales of stability, of structure, of a mother who had sacrificed everything to ensure her daughter had a secure future. But as the arguments raged on, Elena couldn't help but glance at Adrian. His face was a mask of determination, but she knew him too well not to see the pain underneath. She wondered if he saw the same in her. When the judge finally delivered his ruling, the words seemed to echo in slow motion. Joint custody. Sophia would split her time between her parents, a week in the city with Elena, a week by the sea with Adrian. Elena's heart ached, both with relief and with sorrow. She turned to look at Adrian, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was no anger there, no bitterness, just a quiet understanding of what they'd both lost and what they still had to hold on to. As they walked out of the courtroom, Sophia ran ahead, her laughter filling the air. For the first time in years, Adrian and Elena smiled at each other. It wasn't the beginning of a new love story, but perhaps it was the start of something just as important, a fragile, imperfect peace.